If you think you've heard every Trump scandal, think again, because what's coming out now, straight from the halls of Congress and whispered through the corridors of power, could be the most explosive revelation yet. Today, we're diving deep into the real reason Donald Trump is terrified of the Epstein files being released and why. Marjorie Taylor Greene, of all people, is at the center of this political earthquake. Let's start with the basics. For years, the name Jeffrey Epstein has been synonymous with scandal, secrecy, and the kind of elite protection that most Americans can only imagine. We know the broad strokes. Epstein, a convicted sex offender, moved in the highest circles of power, from Wall Street to the White House. His mysterious death in a Manhattan jail cell only deepened the intrigue, spawning 1,000 conspiracy theories and leaving a trail of unanswered questions. But what's been missing from the public? Conversation is the full, unredacted list of Epstein's associates, the so-called Epstein files. And that's where our story takes a turn. Enter Marjorie Taylor Greene. Now, whatever you think of her politics, and let's be honest, she's been one of the most polarizing figures in Congress, she's suddenly found herself on the opposite side of Donald Trump, the very man she once championed. Why? Because she's pushing for the release of the Epstein files, and Trump, according to her own account, is furious about it. Not just annoyed, not just politically inconvenienced, but reportedly screaming at her over the phone, warning that releasing those files would hurt my friends. Let that sink in for a moment. The former president of the United States, a man who built his brand on draining the swamp and exposing the secrets of the elite, is now allegedly fighting to keep those very secrets buried. And the person calling him out isn't a Democrat, isn't a member of the so-called fake news media, it's Marjorie Taylor Greene, one of his most loyal supporters until now. The irony is almost too much to process. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. To really understand what's at stake, we need to look at the context. For years, Trump has used nicknames and public feuds as a way to control the narrative. Remember Crooked Hillary, Sleepy Joe, and all the rest? But now, as his grip on the Republican Party starts to slip, his attacks are getting more desperate and less effective. When he started calling Greene Marjorie Taylor Greene and even Marjorie Taylor Brown because apparently green grass turns brown, it wasn't just a childish insult. It was a sign that he felt threatened. And what was threatening him? The possibility that the Epstein files could finally see the light of day. So what's actually in these files? That's the million-dollar question. We know that Epstein kept meticulous records, flight logs, guest lists, correspondence. We know that some of the world's most powerful men and a few women were in his orbit, and we know that the victims, many of whom have never had their day in court, deserve justice and transparency. But the real fear for Trump and others is that these files could reveal not just who was friendly with Epstein, but who may have been complicit in his crimes. Now here's where the contrast framing comes in. For years, Trump positioned himself as the outsider, the truth teller, the man who would expose the corruption of the elite. But when push comes to shove and the secrets of the elite are about to be exposed, he's the one slamming the door shut. Meanwhile, Marjorie Taylor Greene, hardly a paragon of virtue in her own right, suddenly finds herself on the side of transparency, at least in this one instance. It's a political role reversal that no one saw coming. But let's not give Greene too much credit just yet. Her own record is filled with conspiracy theories, divisive rhetoric, and a willingness to demonize her opponents. For years, she's been one of the loudest voices in the MAGA movement, echoing Trump's every move. So why the sudden change of heart? According to her, it was a combination of personal threats, death threats against her and her son, and a growing realization that the toxic culture she helped create was now turning against her. In her own words, after Charlie died, I realized that I'm a part of this toxic culture. I really started to look at my faith. I wanted to be more like Christ. It's a dramatic shift, but is it genuine? Or is it just self-preservation? That's a question only time will answer. But what's clear is that the stakes have never been higher. When Greene threatened to release the names of Epstein's abusers, Trump reportedly called her in a rage, warning that my friends will get hurt. According to staffers, his voice was so loud it could be heard throughout Greene's Capitol Hill office. And when Greene suggested inviting Epstein's victims to the White House, Trump dismissed the idea out of hand. The message was clear. Protecting the powerful was more important than seeking justice for the victims. This is where the story takes on a new level of urgency, because it's not just about Trump or Greene or even Epstein. It's about the culture of secrecy and impunity that has allowed the rich and powerful to operate above the law for decades. It's about the victims who have been silenced, the evidence that has been buried, and the politicians who have chosen self-interest over accountability, and it's about the American people who deserve to know the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. So where do we go from here? Greene has teamed up with unlikely allies, Democrats like Ro Khanna and even Republican mavericks like Thomas Massie, to push for the release of the Epstein files. It's a rare moment of bipartisan cooperation, driven not by political calculation, but by a shared commitment to transparency. As Khanna himself put it, for the survivors, for transparency, for the victims, we are going to put our politics aside. It's a powerful statement, and one that stands in stark contrast to Trump's efforts to keep the files hidden, but make no mistake. The fight is far from over. The forces arrayed against transparency are formidable. Powerful men with deep pockets and even deeper secrets will do everything in their power to keep the truth from coming out, and Trump, for all his bluster, is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. But here's the twist that makes this story even more compelling. The very people who once cheered for Trump's drain the swamp mantra are now watching as he scrambles to keep the dirtiest secrets locked away. It's a moment of reckoning, not just for Trump, but for an entire movement that claimed to stand for truth and accountability. The contrast couldn't be sharper. On one side, you have a former president, desperate to protect his inner circle, invoking loyalty and fear to keep the past buried. On the other, you have a congresswoman who, for all her flaws and past missteps, is now demanding sunlight, at least on this issue. And let's not forget the victims. For years, their voices have been drowned out by the noise of political infighting and media spectacle. But at the heart of the Epstein files are real people, survivors, who have waited far too long for justice. Their stories are the reason this matters. Their courage is what's driving this push for transparency, even as the most powerful people in the country try to slam the door shut. When Greene stood alongside Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie, it wasn't about political points. It was about finally giving those survivors a chance to be heard. Of course, the cynics will say this is just another political stunt, that Greene is only acting out of self-interest now that she's on the outs with Trump. Maybe there's some truth to that, but sometimes even the most unlikely messengers can deliver a message that needs to be heard. And right now, the message is simple. No one should be above the law, no matter how rich, powerful, or well-connected they are. So what happens next? The pressure is building. The calls for transparency are growing louder, not just from politicians, but from ordinary Americans who are tired of the cover-ups and the double standards. The Justice Department is facing mounting demands to release the Epstein files, and every day that passes without answers only fuels more suspicion and more outrage. The old playbook, deny, distract, deflect, just isn't working anymore. And as for Trump, his reaction speaks volumes. The man who once thrived on chaos and controversy now seems genuinely rattled. His attacks on Greene, his desperate attempts to control the narrative, his refusal to even acknowledge the pain of those caught in the crossfire, it all points to a leader who's lost his grip, not just on his party, but on the story itself. In the end, this isn't just about Trump or Greene or even Epstein. It's about whether we, as a country, are willing to confront the uncomfortable truths about power, privilege, and accountability. The real reason Trump fears the Epstein files isn't just about protecting his friends. It's about protecting a system that has shielded the powerful for far too long. And maybe, just maybe, that system is finally starting to crack.